seated. So we'll see. We'll see how long the voice lasts. So this past week, as I began again at St. John, and in the weeks to come, I will introduce myself to many people. And in fact, last night I had the experience of coming through the sacristy, and there was a woman there, and I thought she looked familiar, and I went up and I said, "Hey!" And she looked at me and she said, "Have we met?" I said, "Oh," and I introduced myself. And I suppose in a large scale, I'm doing that today in worship. Sometimes, and I know it will happen, I will introduce myself to someone I should already know. And here is the reason why. 2.5 years ago, I worked here for 5 years. I ended my time here and went to Olivet, which is in Columbus. When I was here before, I was the director of Christian education, and now I return in a pastoral role as your interim associate. I've also lived in this community for 13 years, over 13 years, which is the longest amount of time that my husband Bill and I have lived anywhere as a married couple. Really, the longest amount of time I've lived anywhere since high school. And so you're familiar to me, not just from St. John, but from school and from the grocery store and from all of the places we encounter one another. But I have been thinking this week, is there something wrong with me? That sometimes I don't recognize people I've met before? Am I arrogant? I hope not. Am I losing my short and long-term memory? Some may say yes. I don't think so, but I wouldn't be the judge if I was losing it, I suppose. Sometimes I have the sinking feeling that I'm just not aware enough of my surroundings in general. And it's probably not because I'm walking around having deep, profound thoughts. I'm making lists all the time. I'm doing a little of this and then a little of that, and picking people up and remembering or not remembering to do that. And for most human failings, there is a biblical character to provide company for our misery. And in my case, Nathaniel, who we just heard about, is a great biblical character for my human failing. In this story from John, Jesus already knows Nathaniel. And as Nathaniel walks toward Jesus, Jesus describes him, right? He says, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there's no deceit." And I've read that perhaps Jesus, it's a little bit of an offhand compliment. I think Jesus is being pretty genuine. It seems straightforward description based on his knowledge of Nathaniel, that he's an upstanding, upright guy. Nathaniel says, in effect, "I don't believe we've met. Where did I get to know you?" And then, when Jesus mentions the fig tree, he is so moved by Jesus' prior knowledge of him, that he was known to Jesus, that he makes a confession of faith. He says, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." To which Jesus responds, in effect, "Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. Do you believe because I told you I saw you under a fig tree? You will see greater things than these." Jesus says, "You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." In our lives, every time we approach Jesus, it is in the context of his prior approach to us. Every time we recognize his presence in ourselves and in others, in events and moments, it's because he continuously recognizes God in us. In my ordination paper, which I wrote a long time ago, and in my profile, which is sort of the version in the United Church of Christ, where I'm an ordained clergy person. It's like my resume. One of the key parts that I write about, and the key parts of what I believe about ministry with one another, is that there is sacred space between people. There's sacred space, an intersection, if you will. And when people come to know one another, and they have mutual respect and love for one another, they can see Jesus in each other's face. That's what we're to always be doing. Jesus already knows us, even if we have no recollection of many of our prior encounters with him, even if we do not name or recognize his presence and efforts in the depths of our lives. I had the privilege, and it really was a privilege, to be with your council, your current leadership here at St. John yesterday morning. Not too early, it was 8:30. And one of the things we did in this time away to talk about the ministries here at St. John was talk about ourselves. And Pastor David laid out on a table a bunch of pictures. And there really was a variety, actually. And our job was to go and pick the one that resonated with us. And then go around the table and say, why? Why does this resonate with you? Why are you interested in continuing the ministries and leading the ministries here at St. John? And I would say in each and every person's story, there was this idea of Jesus present, of God meeting them at some point, whether it be a high pinnacle or a low valley, and the recognition that Jesus, God, the Spirit, worked all of the time. In the Gospel of John, and we'll spend some time with the Gospel of John this year, the Gospel of John has recognition and failure of recognition as a key theme. You'll hear it again and again. In a number of encounters with Jesus, people focus on their problems, right, at a literal level, while he stands unrecognized before them. There's the example of Nicodemus, who comes in the middle of the night. There's the woman at the well who doesn't even know who's offering her water. And the man by the pool at Bethsaida. And there will be others who do recognize Jesus. In fact, Jesus was killed precisely because his enemies recognized him. And as his healings escalated, and drama and power, so did his threat factor to those who opposed him. They recognized him as the bringer of sight to the blind and the raiser of the dead. In the Gospel of John, Jesus always recognizes us, but we do not always recognize him. Jesus recognizes who we are meant to be as children of God in the tangle, and it can seem that way, can't it, of our current lives. And the goal of the gospel is to equip us to recognize his life within ourselves and the world. Jesus said, "These things are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name." Our task is clear. With God's help, we're to enhance, if you will, our facial recognition skills. Knowing Jesus is present in every moment, every person, every situation, we are to be on the lookout, recognizing his presence and influence throughout each day. As I click through the stations on the TV, and there's, so many channels, occasionally I'll come on one that's of interest, and often this guy's on a PBS series by Dr. Wayne Dyer, The Power of Intention. Usually during their fundraising he's on. And one time I was watching him and he quoted Mother Teresa. He said, when someone had asked her, she responded, the question was, "What do you do all day?" "Walking the streets of Calcutta." And she said, "I behold Jesus Christ, the Spirit of God, in every face I see." At the end of the story of Jesus after his resurrection, he's in the garden, and Mary is there, and she doesn't recognize him. She mistakes him for the gardener until he calls her by her name. He says, Mary. He already knows her. They've met many, many times before. And so, like with Mary, our response should be to anyone we meet, well known or the stranger, our response shouldn't be just, oh, good morning. I don't believe we've met. Our faithful response is, I recognize